what I want to do is go over the world religions we looked at in our class and to try to get a better sense for how these different modes of experiencing life relate to what we're going through today, with this whole pandemic. For a lot of people, this is a very scary time. For a lot of people, it's the opposite, right? They seem to be completely naive about what's happening. And if we take a look at the world's religions and what they tell us about the human condition and how to get beyond it, we really see stories that relate very closely to what we're experiencing. And hopefully, by looking at these religions and their stories, we can maybe get a better sense for what we can do to get through it. Yeah? Okay, so in general, when we're talking about religions, if you remember, the word religion, if we take a look at its roots, we can see it being related to a couple of things. In one sense, religion comes from this term religio, and if you remember, religio shares its roots with words like ligament. And ligament, if you know about the human body, is something that ties things together. So in one sense, we can take a look at religions as those things that bind us together. Now, that could be just our individual selves. So imagine going through the chaos of life. It's the thing that keeps us together as opposed to being torn apart by the ups and downs of life. Or you can think of it in terms of community or in terms of, human beings and how as a group, religions are those things that keep us together. So as we see how people have been reacting to the pandemic, it seems like a useful discussion to have. What sorts of ways have people in the past kept themselves together? Within the histories of these religions that we've discussed in class, we've talked about wars and tribal warfare and slavery. And throughout all of these human trials and tribulations, we see that we have binded ourselves together, kept ourselves together through these things called religions. The other way of looking at the root of the term religion is the term religare, and religare refers to read again. And one way to think about this then is religions as being the ways in which we reflect upon our lives, the ways in which we take a breath and look again at how we are living and ask ourselves questions about whether this represents what we value. So hopefully it's obvious then how things like religions might be useful to reflect upon when going through what we're obviously going through with this global pandemic. Okay. So remember Hinduism. Within the Hindu mythology, we're told a story of how we're caught in a continual cycle of death, life, and rebirth, and death, life, and rebirth. And as a result, Hinduism says that we are caught in a wheel of a limited existence, a limited life. And we're caught in this wheel, trapped here because of an illusion. There's something that we don't quite get about life. There's some false understanding we have about how life works. Take a look at how people are reacting to the pandemic. Are they seeing what life is really about, or are they reacting to it based off some sort of illusion based upon valuing things like status or power or money? I don't know if you've seen the news lately, but it looks as if government officials have been, were given information about the pandemic prior, right, to the public knowing about it. And some of these people in government use that information to sell off stock because they knew that the stock market would crash once the virus became wider spread. And you have to ask yourselves, well, why didn't they share that with the public? What kind of life are they living? What kind of existence are they living? According to Hinduism, it's a limited one. It's an existence of limited aliveness, limited awareness, limited bliss. So within Hinduism, the ultimate, if you remember, is Brahman. Brahman is that which is ultimately real. Brahman is the source of all life. And when asked to describe what this feels like, we're told it feels like Sat Chit Ananda. It feels like ultimate awareness, ultimate aliveness, ultimate bliss. So here we are going through this pandemic, and a lot of us do not experience ultimate aliveness. Some of us feel very claustrophobic, right? Because we're stuck in our rooms. Some of us don't feel ultimate awareness because of all the confusion. We just don't really understand what's happening to us. And obviously, a lot of us don't feel ultimate bliss because there's so much about our lives that we aren't able to enjoy as we were before. Well, how can we transcend this condition of being caught in this cycle of an illusion to experience this limitlessness that we're told is accessible to us in Hinduism? Well, remember, within Hinduism, we're told that there are yogas that we can practice, right? Different paths to reuniting with this experience of ultimate aliveness, ultimate bliss, and ultimate awareness. We're told that we can experience this through devoting ourselves to love. Well, how interesting or different might the world be if people, instead of focusing on things like fear, being caught in a cycle of fear and panic, or being caught in a cycle of selfishness where they buy out all of these supplies like hand sanitizers just to resell them later for a profit? What if instead they focus themselves on devoting their lives to love? Might they then experience something greater? Might they then reunite with an experience of unlimited aliveness? If we dedicate ourselves to loving our fellow neighbor, to loving something that's greater than ourselves, some sort of cause, maybe we can experience Brahman, even though we're in the midst of this pandemic. Remember, one of the yogas was Bhakti, Raja Yoga. This path through meditation. So many of us are in this mode of chaos and stress and anxiety that it overtakes us. And Raja Yoga is a path through meditation where we focus our attention on our awareness, on the thoughts that occupy our mind. And then we start to develop the ability to not let those things control us, right? Remember the idea of karma yoga, where we act in the world not to get something from it, but simply because it's our duty. Can you imagine how the world might be a little bit different if we were to focus our time now together while in this pandemic on doing things because it's our duty, not because we're trying to get something out of it, but because we think it's the right thing to do? How might that get us closer to an experience of ultimate aliveness, even while in the midst of this pandemic? Think about Jnana Yoga. If you remember Jnana Yoga, that's the path through knowledge and study. And we use the Bhagavad Gita in our class to see how this might lead us to an experience of Brahman. Now, if you remember, we looked at the story of Arjuna, who's this prince that's going into battle. And when he goes into battle, he sees these people he loves, his family members, his friends. But as a soldier, it's his duty to go into war. And his charioteer, right, the deity Krishna, tells him, no, this is your duty. Remember, this life, this is not the real life. You're in the wheel of samsara. You need to do your duty to escape this life, to escape the wheel of samsara. On the surface, this seems like a horrific sort of thing to say to somebody. Go into battle with the people that you love. Do your duty, because that will give you an experience of Brahma that will help you escape this wheel. But a lot of us are facing this right now, especially those of you within a little younger age range. Do you know an older relative, let's say a parent or a grandparent, who says to you, yes, I'm going to go to Costco right now because I feel like I need to go shopping to prepare food for today? Or they'll say things like, I got to go meet my friends in the park because that's what we do every Monday morning. And you're telling them, no, don't do that. We need to social distance ourselves in order to make sure that we don't spread this virus. And you are entering into conflict with the people that you love, because you feel that it's your duty to make sure that you not only keep them safe, but you keep this pandemic from spreading. This seems like the right thing to do. And by doing that, even though on the surface it feels like you're in conflict with those you love, you're really trying to do something that's helpful, right? That allows all of us to break free from a false perception. Remember the other approach too within Hinduism. It's the idea of non-duality. So here we are, a lot of us are thinking to ourselves, this sucks, right? We are stuck in our rooms, we're stuck in our homes. Some of us are losing jobs because our jobs are non-essential. You know, many of my students are in this predicament, as Mercedes mentioned to us a second ago. So a lot of us just want to escape this and go to a better place, a better state of existence. Within the Advaita tradition, remember, the illusion is thinking that we are right now separate from Brahman, that there's someplace else to go, that there's someone else that we need to become. Advaita says, no, you have to get rid of that illusion. There's nowhere else to go. Everything that you need is here with you now. And just think about that. Can you communicate with those that you love? Can you spend more quality time with those that you care about? Maybe you can, right? Maybe within the circumstance that's there for you as an option. Maybe the things that are really important in life, compassion, empathy, caring for those you care about, maybe those are all here with you. Those are all accessible. And we have to get rid of the illusion that the better world is someplace else and realize, no, I can make that better world here right now. So hopefully that helps make sense out of the Hindu tradition that we've been learning about in class. But hopefully you see also, too, how the story from Hinduism is applicable to our current day life. All of these religions are really telling us about how to go through the normal human experience. I mean, in the past, it might have been about wars. It might have been about oppression. It might have been about political strife. Here, it's obvious that we can apply this to things like a global pandemic. Within Buddhism, right, the Buddha tells us that the human condition is one of suffering. And obviously, for a lot of us right now, we feel as if we're suffering. Now, for the Buddha, though, he points out, hey, but this suffering isn't necessarily just because of the conditions we're in. It's not because that we lost our job, or not because the rain is ruining our party. It's not because of a global pandemic per se. A majority of our suffering comes from tanha, from selfish desire, from selfish craving. In this sense, a lot of unnecessary suffering is a result of people craving for things to be different. We're told within the news that, this isn't going to change overnight. Leaving this pandemic isn't going to be just about finding a new drug tomorrow. I mean, once we find a new drug, it'll be going through tests and then distribution. And even then, this virus isn't just going to disappear overnight. It seems as if we're being told this is something that's going to stay with us. Well, then are we going to be slaves to suffering if this virus stays with us for a long time? Well, the Buddha says, no, because what's causing a majority of our suffering is the craving for things to be different, the craving for things to go back to the way they were. And if we can just let go of that craving, we will suffer less. And in this way of looking at it, the virus and the pandemic should not have complete control over our well-being, because we have a choice on whether or not we crave these things selfishly. And remember, the other way of looking at the human condition according to Buddhism is one of being in a state of ignorance. In particular, if we don't realize that suffering is the result of selfish craving, well, then we will be stuck in suffering. So we are told that there is a place that's better, a state of being that's better than this ignorance and this suffering, and it's the state of nirvana. There is a way to extinguish the suffering. So a lot of people are going through lots of suffering as a result, says the Buddha, of this craving and grasping. And if they can find a way to review how they're feeling and the cause of this feeling, then we can alleviate it. And his path to alleviate this is through the Eightfold Path. Now remember, this wheel of Dharma that you see on the screen represents this Eightfold Path. And the idea is that if we steer it a certain way, we can steer ourselves away from suffering. Things like right action, right contemplation, right mindfulness, right speech. Now, remember what we learned in class about what all of this refers to. It's not necessarily just the morally right thing to do, the morally right thing to say, but a lot of Buddhists focus on the idea that what we should be doing in our lives is acting and speaking and having our intentions based upon loving kindness. Think about how different the world would be if we were to react to this pandemic completely out of loving kindness, as opposed to fear caused by our suffering, or I should say that the way, our suffering that's caused by selfish fear. Right? What if we see a transformation in the world where our speech, our action, our intentions don't just come from wanting something to happen to me, but instead come from us wanting to show loving kindness to one another? We may then see less empty shelves at our grocery store. We might see parents that struggle less to find baby wipes because completely healthy people decided to hoard them all out of fear and selfishness. So within Buddhism, remember the story, the mythos of the Buddha, having everything, a prince within a kingdom, becoming the heir to this kingdom, but decides to leave it all behind to find a solution to human suffering. And through meditating under the Bodhi tree, he becomes enlightened and realizes that really the suffering is the result of how we choose to look at our circumstances, and oftentimes the way we choose to look at it is one of selfish desire. Wouldn't our situation and our ability to cope with the pandemic be a little bit different if we all came and approached it from not a selfish place, but from loving kindness? Within Taoism, remember the story within Taoism, they tell us that life has a natural rhythm to it. Life has a natural flow to it. And unfortunately, a lot of human beings don't feel comfortable unless they exert control over life. Can you see how a lot of people are feeling disharmony with life because they're no longer control their lives? There are a lot of people in power, a lot of celebrities, a lot of authority figures who they used to think they could have control over their lives. But now this pandemic comes in and it's completely obvious that we lack control over the natural flow of life. The question is now, how do you deal with that? How do you relate to that life? Because for the Taoists, we are meant to be in line with this flow. We are meant to be in harmony with it. Earthquakes happen, natural disasters happen, viruses happen. This is a natural process. This is a natural thing that occurs in the world. We can either fight it, right, reject it, not believe it, which some people have done. And in fact, some people did this for so long that it may have had a detrimental effect on the rest of us because they denied it and tried to fight it, right? They tried to say that it wasn't real. So what do we do now? Well, remember, according to Taoists, the path to aligning ourselves, be back in harmony with life, is to let go of control. Realize that, well, life is going to be what it's going to be. If we're being told that we have to stay at home and not go out, you can try to fight that and then feel disharmony, or you can let that go and realize that now that's a new part of your life. That's a new way of having to live our lives. And if you let that go, not only might you feel more at ease, but your mind might be more open for more creative ways of experiencing a good life. One of those ways might be using things like Zoom and communicating with all your friends, having dinner parties virtually, right? Maybe you might be contacting relatives from places that aren't close to you that you would not have contacted before. But it's hard to see those opportunities. It's hard to see those paths of harmony if we're struggling and fighting what's actually happening to us. Within the second half of the term, we talked about the Abrahamic traditions. Now, remember, the Abrahamic traditions all have this foundational story, the story that says there is this creator that created all of life, all that exists, within 6 days. On the seventh, the creator rested. But all this that this creator made, the creator says was good. On that sixth day, he creates man and woman, and proclaims all of that good. And within this creation, this Eden, mankind is meant to be a caretaker for this garden that God created for man, this Garden of Eden. So here is man and woman living within goodness, complete goodness and harmony with God's creation. And then we are tempted by this voice, by this snake that's often referred to as Satan. Well, Satan is a term that refers to adversary. So it's this voice, this adversarial voice, this voice that's against goodness. And it says to us, look, I know God told you that there is this tree of life of which you can eat from abundantly. But he also told you that there's this tree of the fruit of good and evil. And once you eat this fruit, God says to us that we will be, this will cause us death. But me, Satan, is telling you, no, you should eat it. It's so good. It's so delicious. It's so inviting, isn't it? So this adversarial voice is telling us to make a choice that deviates from our good life within the Garden of Eden. So what do we do within the story? We choose to deviate from that good life. We choose to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. One way of thinking about this is that while in the idyllic state of Eden, everything is good, once we take a bite of this fruit, then we know good and evil, right? Taking a bite of this fruit means we are now open to the experience of things that are opposite of goodness. And in fact, maybe it's by taking this bite, we are saying to ourselves, no, we want to define what's good and bad. We don't want God to tell us, right? We want to choose for ourselves. Hence, we exert our free will to take that bite. We want to decide what's good and bad. And as a result, we enter this state of chaos and turmoil and death. Well, if we take a look at our current situation, it seems to be one in which we are feeling as if we're separated from this good life. We are separated from a life of goodness. For a lot of us, it feels as if we have left our Eden. Now, the life prior to the pandemic may not have been idyllic, but maybe looking in retrospect, we feel as if, man, I wish we could go back to that life. Same sort of idea, maybe we can see the original humans within the story feeling. I wish we can go back to the garden. For the Abrahamic traditions, then, God and this life, that's what's most important. Getting back into a relationship with creation, with the Creator, getting back into the idyllic state. And how do we do that? Well, the various traditions tell us it's about reestablishing our relationship with God, reestablishing our relationship to that which we find most valuable. Within the different religions, there'll be different understandings of what God is and different ways of going back into a good relationship with God, going back into that Eden. And through these different religions, hopefully maybe we can see that these paths are applicable to what we're dealing with today. So for instance, within Judaism, we can express this leaving from Eden through the idea that, it was our choice. We made a conscious choice to leave that idyllic state. And throughout the Hebrew Bible, throughout the Old Testament within Christianity, we see these stories of here we go, we leave the garden, and then we have families and have children, and then we create a civilization, and then we make choices that aren't so good. We fight each other, we kill each other. So God has to wipe the slate clean in order for humanity to survive in goodness, to live in goodness. So he has this flood. So we go from this chaos that we created, right, to God coming in and try to restoring order, to try to bring things back into goodness. Well, what happens after the flood? Well, here we are, Noah's descendants, and we make choices that, again, cause heartache and hardship and chaos. So God comes and asks Abraham to be the new founder of a people, the new father of a people that would live under God's rule, right? Under God's law and not the law of man. Remember, eating of the apple, we said, no, we want to create our own laws. We want to decide what's right and wrong, what we should do with our lives. God, and what we see with Abraham is God saying to Abraham, no, you are now, I'm tasking you to start a new order of humanity, right? One that's based upon what I want for you, which is goodness, which is harmony, shalom. So God is this force seemingly within the Hebrew Bible, within the Torah, this force that's always trying to bring us back into order out of the chaos that we create. This force that's always trying to bring us back into a good life, because our choices seem to bring us away from that sort of life. So God then, within this perspective, is the source of all things, is that force that brings us towards goodness and order. God is the father of all humanity. God is this breath of life, because it's through God's breath that we have Adam and Eve. And there is only one God. It's here within the Judaic tradition that we see the birth of monotheism. All these other gods that were all worshipped by various people, we are told within the Hebrew Bible, were created by this one God, Yahweh. We'll take a look at what this represents here. What this represents the view that what we should ultimately value is the fact that we all come from the same creator. We're all part of the human family. We should value the fact that there is a set of rules, a set of laws that are part of all of creation that are meant to bring us back into a good life. And that foundational to those rules and laws is the acknowledgement that God's breath flows through us, that every life is divine, and there's nothing else to worship other than that. Polytheistic traditions have gods for the rain and for thunder and for various things that people thought were of utmost importance in life. Here we're told, no, our God, Yahweh, is the creator of all of those, and what's of ultimate importance is life itself, and the fact that we are all part of that one human family. Can you imagine how things would be a little bit different if we were to look at ourselves within the world, especially going through this pandemic, with this as what we most value, this view of the ultimate? Well, how do we achieve this? How do we achieve getting back into alignment with this force towards good, with this force that's trying to move us towards order? How do we get back into the mindset in which we recognize that we are all part of this human family, that everybody is divine because God's breath is what is in all of us? Well, the path of the Torah tells us that we need to focus on the fact that we are in a constant relationship with God, that we are in a constant covenant with the ultimate. And we can forget this, can't we? We can forget that there's this thing that's important, this divinity amongst all people, this goodness and order. We often have distractions where we think about things like power and wealth and status. But what's of utmost importance is this relationship we have with all of us as being family under, from this creator that's only wanting us to have a good life. Within the stories of the Torah, we see all of these, we see people go through turmoil and hardship and trials and tribulations. I mean, there's slavery, and what we see is a story of a people, of a tribe, that sees God working through all those hardships, right? Where it's God trying to help mankind get out of the chaos prior to the flood, whether it's God trying to tell Moses, help my people escape slavery. The Jewish tradition within the Torah gives us stories that say God is always there, that this force towards goodness and order is always there. We just have to recognize it and establish a relationship with it through faith. So the idea of faith here is related to what we see with the story of Abraham. It's not believing things that are obviously not true. Faith is knowing that you don't know the future. And despite not knowing whether the next step is going to work or not, if you feel as if it's God's will, if you feel that next step brings you closer to goodness, closer to establishing better bonds with the human family, you take that step. A better word maybe is trust. So here we are amongst, within the midst of chaos as a result of this pandemic, and a lot of people are anxious and scared, not much trust, not much faith. And as a result, they do things that are irrational and actually get in the way of humanity living well. What if we had faith? What if we had trust? Well, by saying, I have faith, you're able to relax. You're able to take a step back. You're able to breathe. And then maybe you can recognize with that pause what the right next course of action would be. It's the calling that you feel inside of you towards goodness and order and maintaining the human family. If you take a look at the Christian tradition, again, stemming from the whole garden narrative, within Christianity, we go into this chaos and turmoil, not because we simply made a choice, but because we have within us a propensity to make a choice that deviates from what God wants. There is something within us, original sin, that makes it so that we tend to choose the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil instead of choosing the tree of life that was in that garden. For Christians, the ultimate within this narrative is also God, but they see God as, they relate to God in three various ways. They relate to God as this creator, this father, right, that's beyond us, but that made us. Same way we see within Judaism. But they also see God, and they relate to God as that spirit that moves through all of us, that's telling us what the right thing to do is, that's moving us towards compassion for other people, that feeling, that spirit that bubbles up when you care about others. They see that as a way to relate to God. And then they also relate to God through the story and life of Jesus Christ, right? So here is a man born of a carpenter, this rabbi who's teaching and trying to describe how to interpret the Torah, and he proclaims that the kingdom of heaven is our rightful place. That instead of the oppressive forces of Roman rule or the strict rules of the Jewish elite at the time, that no, we really belong to this kingdom of God. You can think of that as we really belong to a state of community that's governed by love, not governed by selfishness, not governed by pride, and not governed by um, ego, which we see within the elite within the community here, and we see within the Roman emperor's rule. No. Jesus says, no. Your real kingdom is one in which God rules. Well, okay, so how do we achieve that kingdom? How do we reestablish our relationship with God? Well, for Christians, it's the path of Jesus, and Jesus teaches throughout the gospel, as he goes from community to community, teaches about transformation. He tells people to repent. Remember, the Greek term for repentance is metanoia, which just means to change. It's an inner transformation. Because if the source of our problems is original sin, that there's something within us inherently that's causing us to make the wrong choices, then what we need to do is we need to transform that, says Jesus. We need to transform what's in our hearts so that we become more likely to make the choice towards God and the tree of life. Well, how do you repent? How do you change? Jesus preaches things like faith. You have faith in life. You have faith that the worst thing in life will not happen to you. When people think of worst case scenarios, they act irrationally and hoard things. Have you noticed this? They fall in line at gun shops when they don't have faith, when they're acting out of panic. Well, Jesus says, no, you have faith. Have faith that out of the chaos, order is meant to arise. You have faith that out of the turmoil, goodness is meant to arise. You act out of forgiveness. He teaches forgiveness. Instead of holding on to grievances, holding on to the pains that others have caused you, you let those go. A lot of people's irrational behavior is often due to them holding grudges. A lot of people's suffering is a result of them holding grudges for people that have wronged them in the past. And we're told, no, forgive. You must practice forgiveness. And then obviously within the story, we're told that Jesus sacrifices himself for all of humanity. Well, what we see then, the reason why Christians believe they can relate to God through the life of Jesus is that when they try to understand what God is, they see that as sacrificial love. Here is Christ sacrificing himself for the betterment of all humanity, and for Christians, there's nothing more or closer to understanding what God is than self-sacrificial love. Right? It is from God's outpouring that the whole world is created. It is from God's breath that life is given to all human beings. It's this self-sacrificial love that we should worship, that we should value. Well, think about that in relationship to the world now. How might it be different if people had faith that out of the chaos, order will rise? And by the way, if you just take a look at history, we see this, right? Empires fall into chaos and then new civilizations arise. Forests fall because of fires into chaos, but then something new arises. In order to build muscle, you tear it down by working out in order for something new to arise. So we need to have faith that this is just a natural process, that God has given us this natural process to be aware that, out of the chaos, order will come out of it. To forgive others, not to hold grudges, and to be self-sacrificial, right? To love one another, not out of selfish desire, but because it's the thing that we're meant to do. How might the world be a little bit different as we deal with this pandemic? The last ever Abrahamic traditions, right, Islam, we have this story about how the Prophet Muhammad is so worried about the chaos of tribal warfare that he would meditate in this cave. And one day when he was meditating in this cave, he hears this voice of an angel. And he's being called to write down the Quran. The Quran, the holy text within the Islamic tradition, is said to have already been written within heaven, already with God. And that Muhammad is just asked to write it, right? To be the conduit for it to be brought down and shared to the rest of humanity. Well, remember, this Islam comes hundreds of years, few hundred years after Christianity, and then several hundred years after Judaism. And within the Quran, we're told, hey, guys, you've forgotten right? You've forgotten what we've learned from the old text, from the old books. You've forgotten what we've learned from Judaism, but we've forgotten what we've learned from Christ. When we need to remember, we need to refocus our attention back on that in order to get out of the chaos. So within Islam, we can see that the human condition is one of being distracted or blinded from God. We have all these messengers, all these prophets from Judaism. We have Christ that's giving us this good news within the Gospels, and then we have forgotten them. We have forgotten the prophets. We've forgotten what they've been teaching us. So this is kind of the call we see in Islam, is to submit yourself again back to Allah. Right? Here is this God, this one unique, merciful God that was there in the beginning, that we saw within the Judaic story, that Jesus teaches we belong with, right? We belong to his kingdom. And then Islam is trying to refocus our attention back to that, right? We've become so distracted in our lives that we forget what's of ultimate importance. Can you see that at all with what's going on in the world today, where people are reacting to the pandemic and they're behaving in a way where they forgot what's of ultimate importance? Maybe we're not so nice to each other because we're so worried about survival. Maybe we're being selfish because it seems like at that point in time where we kind of have to be in order to make it through the next day. Have we forgotten what's of ultimate importance to us? Have we become distracted? Well, within Islam, we're told that we can refocus ourselves through their pillars of faith. Things like charity, things like constant prayer to refocus our attention to what's of ultimate importance. Within Islam, we are told that we have this ability to listen, right? So here's Prophet Muhammad, and he is listening to the Quran and is a medium for it. Within Islam, we need to refocus, we're told, on God and listen. What is that voice telling us if we were just to step back from the distractions of our everyday lives? What if we were able to refocus our attention not on the veil that stands between us and the life what we want, but if we changed the way we perceive to realize that the life that we want is really not so far away. In fact, it might already be here, as we talked about with Hinduism. And instead of being distracted by all the things that are happening around us that cause us to have frantic and hectic emotions and feelings, what if we were to go inwards and feel that burning eternal flame that drives us towards goodness, that drives us towards order? Remember the story. It talks about the moth that goes to the flame. Within us, says Islam, there is that flame, that divine flame that burns, that if we were to only let go of distractions, we would feel it. And not only would that give us relief and joy, but that would then allow us to move towards spreading that joy and that compassion towards others. Remember the story of Nasruddin and the lost key, where he's looking for his lost key underneath a light. And when somebody is trying to help him look for that key, this helper asks, well, where did you lose it exactly? And Nasruddin says, oh, back over there in my house. And then the helper says, well, why are we looking out here instead of back at your house? And Nasruddin says, because there's more light out here. Well, within the chaos of war, and now within the chaos of a pandemic, it's too easy to focus outward. Within the story, we're told maybe we need to focus inward. That all the things we want out of life, we can experience if we first change the way we see, change what we are feeling, and change how we are listening and what we're listening to. Lastly, we have this myth from the Lakota tribe that talks about how what's most sacred in life is the sacred hoop, right? And what does that mean? It means that there's this connectivity and relationship between all things. There's this balance between all of nature. But the human condition is one where we often make decisions that break that sacred hoop. We often make decisions that do not take into account that what we do affects all other things. Well, wait a minute. Look at what we're being asked to do now. We're being asked to do things like socially distance ourselves, because our interactions with others can have dramatic effects, right? It's very apparent now how all of our actions can dramatically change the well-being of others, spreading the disease if we take the wrong action, or helping to flatten the curve if we were to socially isolate ourselves. Hopefully it's very apparent how we are all part of this sacred tube, and that we all have responsibility to maintaining its cohesion. Now, the way to do that for the Lakota tribe is this path of the sacred pipe. And if you remember, they use this pipe for prayer, and this pipe represents all of the cosmos, all things. So what we see is a path in which we are supposed to have reverence for the connectivity and balance of the environment. We're supposed to pray and have in our intentions all of creation, and not just our own personal selfish desires. Can you see how, by focusing on our relationship to others and how interconnected we all are, we might be able to go through this pandemic and get to the other side without having as horrific results as it could have been if we were just to be selfish and not realize that what we do affects other people. So the hope is that by looking through these various traditions, maybe you can see new ways of dealing with what a lot of us are dealing with now, the stress and anxiety and fear and maybe some boredom. A lot of my students talk about boredom now as a result of living through this pandemic. My hope is that you can share what we've discussed with others who may be having a difficult time, hopefully shed a new light on how they're perceiving their circumstances that will make it much easier for them to get by, but also help all of us realize that it's going to take all of us, it's going to take being conscious of what we do to get through this pandemic. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions or anything you're feeling at this time.